Okay. To do the dialogue, we're gonna use a plugin or an add-on. This kind of sets up a basic system where we can edit dialogue scripts, and then we can launch the dialogue bubbles inside either a 2D or a 3D scene. There's a bunch of different plugins and things that do this. This one I like just because it's very simple to start, but it has a lot of options to expand on it. I used to use a different plugin that doesn't really work as well with the new Godot 4. So I've only been using this one for a little while, but I found that it works pretty well. This is the GitHub page or the home page for the project. And if you scroll down here, there's a bunch of documentation. You can look at the API, you can see examples. There's also some video guides where the developer talks about how to use the plugin. Some of these are a little bit out of date, I've noticed when I've looked at them, but most of the information should be the same. So I'm just going to go over installing the plugin, creating a scene that just has dialogue, so that's not part of a 3D scene, and then we'll go over triggering a dialogue from within a 3D scene, and then we'll also look at how can we use a dialogue to change game states. I'm going to go over to Godot. So we looked at a similar plugin, or not really similar, but we looked at another plugin way earlier in the semester when we used the CSG Mesher plugin. At least in terms of the installation, this works the same way. So we go over to the asset library, and we can just search. I'm going to search for dialogue. It's spelled in the, I guess, British way with the UE at the end. So if, it doesn't really look like what it would look like if we wrote it in English, but it still says dialogue, or in American English rather. I don't know if the guy's British or maybe Australian, but anyway. So to install this, we just click on the dialogue manager and click download, and then click install. And so that'll take a second. It goes pretty fast. And we say okay. If you're here, if you also go here and you want to go back to the home page that I showed before, you can click on view files, and that'll take you out to their GitHub page. Okay, so once we have it downloaded, remember we need to enable it. So we have to go to project settings, and go to plugins, and we have to enable this plugin. So don't forget to do that, because if you don't, it's not going to work. Okay, so now we're going to click close, and the first thing I'm going to do is just make sort of a blank scene that just has dialogue. So this would be useful if you have some sort of intro scene that comes either before your splash menu or after your splash menu, or in between scenes if you have what's called cut scenes with dialogue. You can put anything you want in here. I'm not going to put anything in particular in here because I'm just doing a demo. But you might put 2 characters, or you might put 1 character, or you might put an animation. But anyway, this is just going to be a 2D UI scene, so I'm going to use the user interface node, and I'm going to make an opening dialogue scene that goes before my splash menu. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go into scenes, and I guess I'll make I guess it's not really a level. I'll put this in UI. So I'll call this opening.tscn. And there's not really going to be anything in here. Most of this is going to be done through scripting. I am going to add an image just so it's not completely blank. So I'm going to click here and add a texture rect. And I'm just going to put in that kind of splash image that I used last week, or whenever I did that. So I'll go to textures. Oh, this is actually in my UI folder. And I'm just going to put this in here. Again, this is just an example. You could use whatever you want in here. It could be multiple images. It could be characters. It could be a background, whatever you want to be the graphic in here. But most of everything else we're going to do is going to be scripted. So we're going to add a script that's going to launch our dialogue. we have to create that dialog first. So we're going to go over to the dialog manager and create the dialog, and then we'll use some scripting to open it. So to do that, I'm going to go over to this dialog section over here. So once you enable the dialog plugin, you're going to see that dialog section. And over here, you may see that if the version is out of date, you just want to click on that little version. Since we just installed it today, obviously it's going to be up to date, but sometimes you see this will turn green and you just want to click on that. And then we can just add a dialog. So it's pretty easy. We're just going to add a new file, and it's really just a text file. So it's not a GUI editor. We're not going to be like dragging and dropping stuff around. We're just going to be writing text and using the syntax that they want to create a dialog. So I'll add the new file here. I'm going to make a new folder to contain my dialog files. So I'll call this dialog. I'm going to spell it the way they spell it just to be consistent, but you could call it whatever you want. And I'm going to call this opening. And it's going to give it a .dialog file type, so I don't have to worry about the file type. So I'm just going to click OK. And if you look at, now I have this dialog folder, and this opening.dialog is basically just a text file. So you could edit it in another program. We're going to just edit it in Godot. So when we create a new file, you'll notice a few things. The first line, this little, there's a little tilde, which is the little wiggly sign, that sets the beginning of a section of dialogue. So one file can contain multiple sections of dialogue, which can link to each other. I'm probably not going to go over that specifically, but if you have like a much more advanced system, you could do something like that. There's a couple basic things here that show kind of how the dialogue system works. So you can see you start with like a character name and then a colon. That's not necessary. We can create dialogue that doesn't have a character name, but if you have characters talking to each other, you can start with a character name. This little thing here shows you that you can have like different options. So this will randomly choose one of these three different greetings, and then this is just some regular dialogue. And then after that, you can have different options. So if you have a dash, each dash is going to represent an option that you can choose in your dialogue tree. And when you have different options, if they go to more complex trees, you can go to other parts of your dialogue. When you want to end either a section, you can end here, or if you want to end an entire dialogue, you can use a little equal sign and an arrow and then end here. We can preview this dialogue to see what it looks like, and then we're going to edit it to make our own dialogue. So if I click on the preview button in the dialogue tree, you can see it's not actually launching our whole scene, it's just launching the dialogue. As opposed to if I click the main preview button, now you can see our scene, but we don't see the dialogue because we haven't actually scripted the dialogue to start yet. Okay, so let's preview this dialogue. And so you can see it kind of animates. There's a lot of things that you can change, but I'm not going to go into all the defaults for the visual design. If you want to change that stuff, you can take a look at their documentation, or we could talk about how to do that. Anyway, if I hit enter, it'll go to the next line. And then when I have some choices, I can choose these different choices, and it'll go through those different choices. So for now, we're just going to make a really simple opening script, and then when we do it in the other scene, we'll do a little bit of a dialogue tree. Okay, so I'm going to delete most of this. I'm going to change the title to opening. And I'm going to delete most of this, and I'm just going to have like a little narrative opening for my game. I'm just going to do some basic stuff here just for the demo's sake. I'm not going to get too in depth, but I'll just say once upon a time there was a video game, and the video game was fun to play. So we'll just have a little opening. We don't need to do anything too crazy. So if we preview this, all this is going to do is say, once upon a time there was a video game was fun to play, and then that's it. So what I want to do now with my script is first launch that dialogue inside of the opening scene, and then when the dialogue is done, I want to go over to my splash scene so I can actually start the game. So I'm going to script a couple things. There's a lot of different things that you can do with it, so I'm just going to go over some basics. But if you have specific things, like I want this number of dialogues, whatever, we can talk about how to do that. So let's go to our scene node and add a new script. And I'm going to click on the folder, make sure this goes into scripts. And then opening.gd is fine. That's a good name for this because it's going to script the opening. So I'll click create here. And so I need a few variables that I can set to start, and then we're just going to use a couple lines of code with our dialog manager. So the first thing I want is a reference to the dialog. So I'm going to use an export file. So we used this a little bit in a previous lesson to load different scenes. So I'm just going to use an export file, and the variable will be called dialog file. And then we need a name for the dialog that we want to run. So remember, our dialog is just called opening, so it's the same as the file name, but we need to know which dialog to run. So we also want an export variable dialog name, and we'll fill that in our editor. You could also hard code this if you want to. Oh, and I need to give this a type. So this is just a string. Okay, that should get rid of that error, right? Yeah, okay. So then the last variable that I need is a file that I want to load when the dialog is over. So I'm going to use another export file, and I'm going to call this next scene. And I don't need to give that a type because it knows that it's looking for a file. So those are all the values that I need. And so now I just have a really pretty simple script. I'm going to add a function ready. So this is just going to run as soon as the scene starts. Let me turn off the lights since it's hard to see. Okay, so when we start, so everything that you do with the dialog manager uses this dialog manager object. And so this is kind of like our global variable that we use to save our global values, but it's just called dialog manager. So everything is going to start with dialog manager dot something something. And if we hit dot here, it's going to show us like a bunch of options here. We're really just using a pretty basic default here. So we'll see what that looks like. We're just going to show, and so you can see there's different options to show a dialog balloon. This option means that you have to create your own dialog balloon, and that's pretty easy to do. But I'm not going to do that right now just for the sake of time. I'm going to use the example dialog balloon. So I'm going to click show example dialog balloon. Then in here, there's two parameters. One is the file for the dialog, and then the other is the name of the dialog that we want to load. So for the file, we have to actually load the file. So I'm going to put load here, and then I'm going to put dialog file. You could also hard code this if you want to, but I think it's nice to use a variable. And so then the name of the dialog that we want to load. So we're going to call this dialog name. Okay. So that's kind of a long line, but let's see. We can make our code larger to see everything. So then the last thing that we want to do is we want to change scenes when the dialog is over. So we need to set up a signal for this. And we actually don't need to use this signal in the editor because the dialog manager, our dialog doesn't exist in our hierarchy. So we're just going to use our code to set up this signal. So we're going to say dialog manager add signal, or no, connect, sorry. Yeah, we're going to say dialog manager.connect, and we're going to connect our signal is dialog ended, although I'm assuming I keep spelling this wrong. So we're going to connect our dialog ended signal to a function. So we'll just call this on dialog ended. And that function doesn't exist yet, so let's write it. And this is just going to do whatever we say to do when the dialog is done. So let's make another function on dialog ended. And this is just going to change our scene. So we're going to say get tree, and then change to scene to file. And then we're going to use our next scene variable there. So that should be our whole script. I think that should work. We'll test it and see how it goes. So then we just need to choose our opening node and set our variables. So for the dialog file, I'm going to click on the folder, go to dialog, and choose opening.dialog. And the dialog name is opening. And then the next scene is in our scenes folder. We're going to go to UI, and we're going to go to splash menu. Okay, so let's see if that works. So we have our dialogue starts when the game starts. Once upon a time there was a video game, and the video game was fun. And looks like we got an error. We did get an error. Okay, so let's check out that error. Oh, okay, so this is actually a good thing to go over. So this dialog ended script is basically, this might be a little confusing, but essentially the error is because this on dialog ended signal is expected to have an argument. So a lot of the time when we use like a signal, there's usually an argument here, like for our body entered, it might be like body, or sometimes it's underscore body. So we just need to add an argument here. We're not actually going to use this argument, so I'm going to put an underscore at the beginning, which just signifies that we don't actually care about this argument. And the thing that it's going to give us is probably the dialog name or something like that. So let's just call this, I'll just call this dialog, because we're not going to use this anyway. Okay, now we should be good. Okay, so we're gonna hit enter to go through our dialog. And so now it looks the same because I'm using the same image, but you can see we've loaded our splash menu. And if I click start, now we have loaded our game. Okay, so that is a very basic setup for our dialog. We're gonna get into a more complex setup for our dialog within our game. We'll have an NPC, and we'll give the player the ability to talk to the NPC. And we'll also give the NPC the ability to change the state of the game as we play it. Any questions before we go through that process? Yeah. You mean here? So I just I saved the dialog that I created in the dialog editor in this dialog folder. And I just called it opening.dialog. It's good? Okay. All right, so let's go to our Pac-Man scene. That's kind of the scene that I've been using the most. And we're gonna add a little NPC guy in here. And we'll give the player the ability to talk to them. And then we'll also, we have this like key in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the script a little bit so that we actually have to get the key from the NPC, and we have to exchange our apples to do so. And we'll be able to do all of that stuff using the dialog editor and a script. Okay, so let's make our NPC first. I'm not going to do a ton of features on the NPC. I'm just going to kind of make it standing around. So I'm going to make a new scene, and I'll make a 3D scene. I'm going to make it a character body just in case you actually want to do more with this. You can script it and do other stuff with this. So I'm going to change the type to a character body 3D. If you wanted to walk around and stuff like that, you could add an agent like we have with our enemies. But I'm just going to leave it as the kind of default. So let's add in a collision shape. And I'm just going to use a little, let's use a capsule. And I'll make it stand right there. And then, oh, I just hit Command S. I haven't saved it yet. So let's save the scene. So I'm just going to hit Command S to save. I'm going to go back to components. So I'm in scene/components. I'm going to save this as npc.tscn. Okay, so I'll save that. I need to give the NPC some type of visual. So I'm just going to add a mesh instance. And I'll just go ahead and make this mesh instance also a capsule. And I'll move this guy up here like this. And let's give it a nice material. So I'll go into my materials and I'll grab my key material and throw it on there. Again, I'm not really spending a lot of time on the visuals, just doing something so that we can actually see where it is. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an area. So very similar to last time when we used a collision area to detect when our player is interacting with an enemy. We're going to do the same thing here, except now this is to trigger the dialogue. So I'm going to click on the NPC. I'm going to add a new area. So I'll get an area 3D, and I'll call this dialogue detection or detector. It doesn't really matter what you call it, as long as it makes sense. And then I'm going to add a collision shape to this. And then your collision shape, of course, is going to determine when your player is going to interact with the NPC. So if you want it to be facing, if it has to be in front of the NPC to detect it, you can make a box or a circle or whatever. I'm just going to make a cylinder, and I'm going to make it kind of small and wide. So I just kind of have to get into the area of this NPC, and it'll launch my dialogue. So again, whatever shape you make this, that's what the player is going to interact with to trigger the dialogue. Let's make sure to put our NPC and our dialogue detector on different layers so that they interact with the right things. So I'm going to choose the NPC character body first. I'm going to go to collision, and I'm going to make a couple new layers. So I have NPC layer and dialogue detector layer. So the NPC goes on the NPC layer. I'm going to make the NPC interact with the player, so the player can't walk through the NPC. I'm going to use the platforms just in case I add physics at some point. And everything else I think I don't really care about. I might use like enemies so that they can't run into each other or pass through each other. And maybe the pickable, in case I throw something, it won't just pass through it. Just to be a little bit realistic, but again, it doesn't really matter that much. Then on the dialogue detector, let's go to the collision here. And of course, we're going to put it on the dialogue detector layer. We're going to turn off the player layer. And then we're just going to mask for the player, and that's it. We only care if the player enters the dialogue detector. Okay. So we've done everything we need to do here. We just need to add some dialogue and some script, and a script. So let's write our dialogue first. Let's go to the dialogue, and we'll make a new one, and we'll call this NPC. This is just generic. Of course, you can call this whatever you want. If you have multiple NPCs or multiple dialogues, call it whatever you want to match that. And let's actually give this a little bit of a dialogue tree. And we'll leave out the state changes for now. We'll just make something simple, and then we'll bring it back later. So I'm going to call this NPC intro. And so let's give the NPC a name. Call it Jerry. And so Jerry will say hi or hello or howdy. And let's say my name is Jerry. And then we can give our player a name. We'll call it Owen after me. And I'll say, hi, how can I go through the portal? And we don't have any options actually. Let's say hi. And then let's say Jerry will say, how's it going? just so we can see different branches. And so the first branch will be Owen, and I will say it's bad. And the second branch will be also Owen, and I'll say it's good. You know, you could, depending on what those answers are, you might go different ways. So you could use that logic, like if you have an NPC, and depending on how you respond, they may, you know, give you information, or they may give you an item, or they may do different things. So let's make this so if I say it's good, then we're going to go to another dialogue. So I'll do a little arrow, and I'll say collect key. So we'll have another dialogue to collect the key. And if I say it's bad, then we'll just go to end. Okay. And for now, for my collect key dialogue, I'm just going to do a quick example, and we'll build this out later. I'm just going to have Jerry say collect the key, and then we'll end there. Okay. I'm getting an error because I just need to get rid of this. Okay. So now we have a dialogue with a couple different options. If I say it's bad, then the dialogue is over. If I say it's good, then we're going to go to this separate dialogue to collect a key. And in the collect key dialogue, we'll add some logic in a little bit. Okay. So we've got our dialogue, and now we need to write our script to add the dialogue to the NPC. This is going to be very similar to our previous script, except we're going to wait for a signal when the player enters the dialogue area. So I'm going to click on the dialogue detector, and I'm going to go to the signals and go to body entered. And then here, you could put the script on the main NPC or the dialogue detector. Either one. I'm trying to think if there's a reason to do one or the other. Let's put it on the main NPC, because then we'll be able to edit the variables from another place. So let's go to the main NPC node. Let's add a script. Make sure it's in the scripts folder. npc.gd is fine. We'll create this script, and we'll give it a couple variables. So we'll do export file, and we'll give it a dialog file, and then we'll export the dialog intro or dialog name, and we need that to be a string. And so that way the NPC will know what dialogue to load, and we can change it on different NPCs if we want to. Okay, so then we just need a signal to start the dialogue. So from our dialogue detector, we're going to double click body entered, and we'll connect this to the NPC. And here we'll just launch our dialogue. So we'll say dialogue manager, and we'll say show example dialogue balloon. We're going to load our dialogue file, and we're going to load the dialogue name. I think that's pretty much all we have to do. We may have to come back here later, but this should be good enough to get us started. So I'll save this, and then again, if I wanted to change, so now my NPC, oh, I have an error. Okay, let's see. Oh, I just needed to scroll up. So now my NPC has the option for a dialog file and a dialog name. So for different NPCs, you might have different files, or you might have one file with different dialog names. Either setup will work fine. Let's go back to our scene and add in our NPC. So I'm just going to click on the main node and use the instance button and find my NPC component. Okay, and let's put the NPC, let's hide the NPC over here somewhere. maybe behind here. Okay, and then we just need to set these properties. So if I click on the NPC and go to the dialog file, I'm gonna go to dialog and choose npc.dialog. And for the dialog name, I'm gonna call this npc underscore intro. And so it just has to match here. And if you have multiple dialogues for different NPCs, you can put them all in here. Okay, so let's see if this works. So let's run our scene. Okay, so there's the NPC. And when I get close, it launches that dialogue. Okay, so it says, hello, my name is Jerry. And once the dialogue launches, notice that I can't do anything. Well, actually, I can move, but I can't move the mouse. So we do need to make sure to figure out, how to manage that stuff. We also might want to make the player not move. But anyway, we get the dialogue. I'm going to hit enter, say hi. He says, how's it going? I forgot to change these defaults. I also forgot to get rid of the dialogue. Okay, so we need to fix this script to do a couple things a little bit better before this will work, right? So let's go back to our script. So when we enter, we want to show the dialogue. Let's also make the player not be able to move anymore. So we know that the body is the player. So let's take a look at our player script and see if there's an easy way to prevent the player from moving. Okay, so our physics process here moves the player. So let's just make a Boolean to turn that off. This is a little bit simplistic, but I think it should be good enough. So we'll make a Boolean here called is talking, and we'll set this as false by default. And so then in our physics process, we'll say if is talking, we'll just return. Okay, so I think that'll be okay. That'll prevent our player from moving while we're set up in our dialogue scene. The other thing that we can do is once we enter a dialogue with the NPC, we can say body, so this is really the player, dot is talking equals true. And then we'll also add a signal for if the player leaves. So I'll go to node and we have to go to the NPC. So I'll go to the dialogue detector, go to node, player body exited. Although actually if we can't move, we can't leave the dialogue. So let's add a signal for when the dialogue is over instead. So let's do that in our NPC script. We'll make another function. We'll do basically the same thing that's in our opening script. So in function ready, we'll just add a signal. So we'll say dialog manager dot connect. So we'll connect a signal. We'll connect dialog ended to on dialog ended. And so when the dialogue ends, we'll make it so that the player can walk again. Although we need to get a reference to the player because this body won't exist down here. So let's get a quick player reference. So we'll say player is character body 3D, and we'll set player equals body. And then on dialogue ended, we'll say player dot is talking equals false. Okay. I think that'll fix everything. Let's take a look. There's probably more sophisticated ways to do this, but just want to get a basic setup first. Okay, so now if I enter this area, should start a dialogue. Okay, so now I'm in dialogue and I can't move, so that's a good start. So now my NPC says, howdy, my name is Jerry, and I say hi. And he says, how's it going? And I need to edit this to take out the defaults, but if I say first one, then the dialogue should end. And I say it's bad, dialogue ends, and now I can't move. Okay, so let's debug. Okay, we've got some errors. Oh, I did the exact same thing I did before, which is I didn't put a parameter here. Okay, so I need a blank parameter as an argument to onDialogEnded, or it's not going to get called correctly. Okay, let's update our script so we don't use first one. Let's say it's bad and it's good. Okay. Let's try that again. Okay, it says, hello, my name is Jerry. Hi, how's it going? So now if I say it's bad, I say it's bad, and now I can move again. Okay, great. You did see that I moved a little bit when the dialogue ended, and that's because I probably still had some velocity that hadn't been applied yet. So we could also set the player velocity to 0. Might be the right way to fix that. But yeah, there's a lot of details that, we can get bogged down with, but let's just try to get the basics done. Okay, so we've got our dialogue running. Let's see if our collect key works. So let's run this again, and I'll go over here and go through my dialogue tree. Oops. So now I'm going to say it's good. So I say it's good, and he says collect the key. Okay. So now we're going to add a little bit of programming, scripting logic, so that the NPC can either give me the key in exchange for the apples, or will not give me the key in exchange for the apples. And so this way, I'll be able to, incorporate the NPC in the process of completing the level. Any questions on any of that? Yeah. Yeah. I should put some notes in here. So get a reference to the player, and then we can just say player. So this pauses player movement, re-enables player movement. Okay. All right, so let's add in our logic. So we're gonna have to change a couple things here, but the main thing is gonna be here. So if we go to the collect the key script, let's start with Jerry saying, or let's start with me saying, okay, wait. So Jerry says, how's it going? I say it's good. So let's have Jerry say, I have a key to the portal. And then I can say, then Jerry will just say, you can exchange 10 apples for the key. Okay. So then we'll give the player the option. So they can either choose to exchange the apples, or they can not exchange the apples. So for an option, we just use a dash, and we'll say exchange apples. And then the other option is keep apples. So if we keep apples, we're just going to have Jerry say, okay, goodbye. That's the end of that tree. If we want to exchange the apples, here's where we're going to check our global variable to see if the player has apples. So remember in our global script, if we go back to the script area for a second and go to global, we have this apple count, and we can reference our global variables or our auto load variables within our dialog. So we can say if global.apple count is greater than or equal to 10, we can have Jerry say, great, here is the key. And then we can also set a value. So we can say set global.has special key to true. Okay, so if we look at our global script, we have this has special key variable that's either true or false. And so if we have enough apples to exchange for the key, then we'll set that has special key value to true. And that'll let us go through the portal. So then if we don't have enough apples, so I'll say else. Oh, it's giving me invalid indentation. Oh, I have a red. Okay, let's see what this output says. Invalid indentation. Okay, so maybe I don't want to go over. Okay, so if I don't have enough apples, then Jerry is going to say, you don't have enough apples. And then we'll end the dialogue there. Okay. I think this should be indented, but it doesn't seem to like that. But let's see if this works. And then we can debug a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to enter here. Okay, so I have to go to the it's good tree. Okay, so then he says, I have a key to the portal. You can exchange 10 apples for the key. Okay, we only see one option, so that definitely means there's an error with our script. But let's see what happens when we hit enter. He says, you don't have enough apples. So that's actually right, but we didn't get both options. So let's try indenting this again. I'm just going to tab these guys over. And let's see if it'll let me run it. Okay, so let's go again. Oops, I chose the wrong option. I should have made it's good the first option. Okay, it's good. I have a key to the portal. Okay, so now we have both options. So if I keep apples, we're just going to leave the tree. If I exchange apples, he says I don't have enough apples, and that's it. So let's go collect some apples, although I jumped back into the portal, so I have to be careful. Okay, let's grab these apples. Okay, so I have 10 apples. Now let's go back. He says, okay, hi, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Let's exchange our apples. He says, here's the key. And so now I have the apples and the key, so I should be able to go through the portal. And that worked. So one thing is we did exchange apples, so it doesn't really make sense that we still have the apples. So we can also set our apples to 0. So besides setting our global apples, we can set global dot or special key apple count equals 0. And then I forgot to put an end here. This should be an end. So then the last thing I want to change is now I want to make it possible to leave the level without the apples, because otherwise we won't be able to leave. So let's go to our scripts and go to portal. And we're just going to ask about the key. Okay. So now all of that together should make sense. So I'm going to collect all my apples. I'm going to go into this dialog. I'm going to exchange my apples. Now I have a key. And now I should be able to go through the portal as long as I don't get hit by the bad guy. There we go. Okay. So again, these are just a few examples. You can see there's a lot of different ways I could go with this, but this is just a few examples to get started. You don't have to use this type of logic in your dialogue. You can just have conversation. You can just have narrative. But you do have the option to change game states or set variables or set different parameters that change what's happening in the game overall. So yeah, there's a lot of other things you can do with it. I definitely recommend, if you want to use this for more stuff, to check out the videos because they go over a lot of the features that you can do with the dialogue manager. But if you want just something simple, that's a pretty good way to get started. If you want to change the design, there's a video here, Cool Dialogue Balloons, I think. Or no, maybe it's Making Speech Balloons. No, it's one of these videos. But there's a built-in feature. If you go to Tools, you can create a copy of the dialogue balloon example. That's how you can make your own dialogue balloon where you change the style. So if I create this, I basically make my own version of the scene where I can change the colors or do different stuff. But that's a whole other process. So I'm going to skip that for now. If that's something you want to do, I would watch the video, and we can go over ways of doing that as well. All right. Any questions on any of the dialogue stuff? Yeah, I had it right the first time. I was just getting an error, and it still is red. I don't really know why, but basically, when you start a new thread or a new branch of the tree, you just use a dash. It's pretty small, it's hard to see, but you basically just have a dash, and that first part is the option that you see, and then everything under there has to be indented 1 over, just like you normally would with your code. And then this part works basically the same way that normal Godot scripts work. You just have like if, and then you have a conditional statement, and then you can put more dialogue down here. You can set values. It looks a little bit different, but it's basically the same idea. So yeah. All right. Other questions? Okay, cool. So we'll have some workshop time until 4. I'm also going to go over using some animations then. That will not take quite as long, so we should have more workshop time in the second part of class. But I'm going to stop